Grandmother, 6 times removed. Written and read by Mary Teresa. Copyright 2016. The hero was certain he was dead. He thought the slender form was a sapling, bent forth to drink of the river. She rose then and saw him, gesticulated, and shouted something incomprehensible. He had left his camp some time before to take a shit. He left important things behind, like his survival pouch and his coat. While he was so preoccupied with his bodily functions, several trees uprooted themselves and blocked his view of the camp. As he was finishing up, clouds congregated and hid the moon and the stars. He was plunged into a darkness that was absolute and unforgiving. He was arrogant, however, and one could suppose for good reason. He had graduated top of his class and achieved a high rank quickly. He retired early and well, and thought himself admirably suited to the life of an adventurer. The wandering spirit was strong in him. The wandering spirit abandoned him when he left the safety of the camp. The spirit knew not to stumble about in the forest at night, alone. It had, in fact, issued a warning to the man. Being arrogant, the man ignored this warning. While he was stumbling about in the blackness, he remembered another warning, to always carry his survival pouch with him. As he remembered this, he decided to stay where he was now and wait for morning. Morning came and went. The forest remained black and absent of light, for the clouds not only remained in their congregation, but decided to pour rain upon the earth. The man had no means by which to start a fire. He had no survival pouch, nor tinder. He had wandered too far from camp to hear the calls of his comrades. The forest was chilly that second night, and as black as the first. He shivered and regretted again the absence of his pouch and his inability to start a fire, as the guides had, using nothing but wooden stakes. Even with the flint that was in his pouch, the rain was heavy, the forest floor damp, and he would have been at a loss in starting a fire. He lost track of the days. He made his way to where he thought the camp might be, but every tree looked the same to him. Moss didn't seem to grow only on one side of any tree, and that was his only understanding of how to tell direction. He could have navigated if the stars had not been hidden and he'd been on the seas. He felt incompetent in a new and frightening way. On one such starless night, St. Erasmus appeared to him. Next time some Indian tells you to do something, you'll be sure to listen now, won't you? The man was bleary-eyed from lack of food, this is true, but the saint appeared as solid as the purple velvet chair he sat on. The man moved towards Elmo's fire, which neatly moved away. In this manner, the man found the stream. He collapsed into it and drank heartily of the water. His clothes were tattered, having been torn repeatedly by sharp spines of trees and plants. His skin was blotchy from the poison oak he brushed up against some days before. He was so weak he couldn't move his head from the water, and likely would have drowned had it not been for her. She mumbled some words of exclamation, and he knew he had gone to heaven, for he could not understand what she said. She was as close to naked as the man had ever seen. The women in his community wore as many clothes as could be fit on a body. The expanse of her legs was the first thing he saw, as she grabbed him by his hair and pulled him so he could breathe. He sputtered, then vomited. She groaned and said, "Yuck!" Another woman joined her. "What have you got there, Willow?" she said. She took a closer look at the emaciated man and said, "Yuck!" Willow told her to get help, and she washed the man while help took its time coming. She looked down at him and said, "You'll be okay soon." He didn't understand her words. Her eyes, a smooth brown, crinkled in encouragement, and it was the memory of that which inhabited his dreams. Willow said, "I will not care for him, Father." She stomped her foot to emphasize her point. Mother was patiently preparing the salves and ointments the man needed, and her face was grim. "He smells," Willow said, and she looked from one parent to the other. Father stomped his foot too in mimicry and said calmly, "Help your mother. You are the eldest, and you need to learn her skills in healing." Willow made a face and repeated, "He smells." Mother said, "Then it is your task to bathe him." Willow stomped again, but as it was in the direction of the water bowls, neither parent called any attention to it. She bathed him none too gently. The Euro's eyes never left her face. He moved his limbs as best he could in his weakened state, and grinned like a fool whenever her eyes graced his face. When she leaned over him, he could catch her perfume, like rich earth freshly tilled and ready for planting. She bathed him and sweated him and bathed him again. Mother showed her which salves would repair, which damage, and she slapped them onto that poor man. Mother snorted and said, "Willow, gentleness is necessary with the ill." Willow blushed at her mother's gentle rebuke and used a gentler touch. The man was grateful. He never stopped watching her, listening to her, obeying her when she motioned for him to open his mouth for some wonderful broth. He still had not acquired the capacity for speech, and something was quite wrong with his hearing, as what came from her lips was mere gibberish, beautiful, lyrical gibberish, and he did what he could to evoke more. One day, language returned to him, and he said, "Thank you," after she had finished ladling broth into him. "Well," she said as she wiped his mouth, "you're not an idiot." He didn't understand this, and used his finger to clear his ear. As his first linguistic attempt had caused her to smile, he said thank you again. She laughed. It was pleasing to the man, and he smiled back at her and thanked her yet again. Mother and Father entered the sick room at this sound. "What's so funny?" asked Father. Willow said, "He thanked me for not calling him an idiot." Father wondered aloud why Willow wouldn't call the man an idiot. The man traveled without his survival pouch. Willow ignored this and said, "He used the proper words. He is coming to understand language again." Mother did a quick examination of the man and nodded with approval. "He is healing well, Willow, though his skin really is an awful tone." Willow murmured, "I think, Mother, that might be his natural color." She traced the intricate web of veins and arteries visible under the pearl of his skin and said in a low tone, "I think it beautiful." She knew his eyes were upon her face. They always were, and now her face grew hot for some unknown reason. "Thank you, Willow," he said again. Her name was difficult for the Euro's tongue, yet he pronounced each syllable with the subtlety of the wind caressing the boughs of the willow tree itself. Mother's voice was perhaps sharper than a healer's should be. She said, "You should sleep now," and she pushed her daughter out the door. "Thank you, honored mother," the man called out. Father remained behind. He smoked his pipe and watched the man as if the man's measure could be ascertained this way. He shared his pipe with the man, and noticed he knew the proper ritual. He spoke quietly, knowing the man's understanding of language was still fragile. He was uncertain of what tone to use, for this was the first Euro he had met. He knew only of the stories told of how obtuse Euros were in matters of manners. A father's concern for his daughter as she chooses a mate not of his liking is universal. The Euro had heard this tone before, and he had seen these words before as well. He remembered with sudden pain the letter that told of his wife's death in childbirth, and the death of his son. He remembered the news of how the ship with his father-in-law on board had been lost at sea. Soon after the letter had been sent, the man left for the wilderness the next day. "Are you all right?" Father asked, for the man's face was contorted in pain, and tears fell from it. The man wiped the offending tears roughly away, and breathed deeply to recall the ones threatening to fall from the corners of his eyes. "Willow healed me," he said. The depth of his feeling for her was heard again in the way her name moved from his tongue. Father said, "Yes," and took a puff from his pipe. "You were never in danger of dying. You were hungry and dehydrated, but even if all you'd done was stay in the shallows of the river, most of your pains would have gone away. No one dies of the injuries you had." He wanted to minimize the nature of the debt. He did not want this man to stay. The Euro, of course, failed to understand. So Father said clearly, "I want you to leave as soon as you are able. I think in a few days you will be able." The Euro had seen these words before. He said, "I took Isabel away from her father. She died. My son died. He died. It was like I killed the entire family. I will leave." The man spoke in gibberish, and Father could not understand the words. He too, though, had seen them before. The man's pain transcended limitations of language. Father shared his pipe with the man, and waited for him to become calm and fall asleep. Mother scolded Father the moment he emerged from the shelter. "He almost died," she said. He scowled and said, "I do not want my daughter to care for him any more. Take care of him yourself." Mother raised her eyebrow in a universal gesture, signifying the disapproval of a wife. "That sounded like an order, Chief," she said, and her tone dripped with something akin to danger. "Of course it was a mere request, woman," he said, but he stomped off nonetheless. Over the next several days, Father found innumerable ways of occupying Willow. She was not pleased, and found ways to elude her new responsibilities around every mealtime. Mother colluded in this somewhat by finding ways to occupy Father during mealtimes. Mother also took over the education of the man, carefully instructing him in the use of language. He had shown her respect with the first words he spoke to her, and she appreciated the gesture. Father discovered the subterfuge on the third day and shouted at Mother, "He will take her away." She reminded him, "You took me away from my father, and I have been bitter and angry with you for that, despite the children we have and the life we grew." She softened her tone. "It is the role of children to leave their fathers. All that matters is whether he is a good man. We will find that out over time." Father was adamant, though, and repeated his wish that the man would leave. Mother shouted at him. To send him away in this condition would be tantamount to murder, and this seemed to cause him to pause in his intent. The summer trading expedition returned as it did each season. Uncle had 20 men and 7 canoes for the trading with the Métis and their Euros, a journey of 30 sunsets to the cold lands and 10 back. As chief negotiator and trader, Uncle spoke some of the Métis language, mostly the Cree some, and he was brought to the stranger's tent before the canoes were even unpacked. Uncle asked the man, "Your pal is John Baptiste Martin?" The Frenchman's face brightened, and he said, "Oui, oui, je suis Jean Baptiste Martin." Mother went, "Ah." That's what he was trying to say, while Willow smiled a knowing smile. for the man had whispered his name often enough for her to know it. Uncle said to Father, "They speak gibberish." They both stared at the man, and he stared back. "We noticed," said Father. The man looked at the chief and said clearly, "I am Jean-Baptiste Martin." There was a bit of a challenge to that, a hint that he was staking some claim. Father scowled. Uncle said in a bit of a hurry, "His people are concerned about him. They speak highly of him and are looking for him." Father scowled. It would be better the man was a reprobate. Uncle said, "He will have to stay longer. The snows are early and already ice is forming on the river." Father objected. "Surely you can make one more trip." Uncle sneered. "Surely we can, if you would see us all frozen." Father scowled again. "I don't want this man to stay." Mother joined in. He would see him dead as well. Father's scowl weakened. "Of course I wish the man gone, but not so much as to see good friends die." Mother was laughing, though, and Uncle joined in. He was a father, too, and understood. He patted Father on the shoulder and said, "I know you worry about Willow. This man is a man of honor, cherished by Métis and Euros alike. He was stupid for a moment. He had received bad news." Uncle relayed what Jean-Baptiste had spoken of with such pain. Father was a good and compassionate man, despite being the sire to a beautiful daughter, and his eyes welled with tears at the man's misfortune. The tasks Father had set Willow to for the past several days no longer seemed important. He didn't exactly acquiesce, but with both wife and brother against him, he thought to let Willow make her own choice. She had been listening to the conversation, pretending to work, and ran to Jean-Baptiste's shelter before the words, "Teach this man something of our ways," had barely left Father's mouth. Mother and Uncle both laughed. Uncle repeated, "This man is a good man. Good men have told me so. The Métis settlement is larger than 5 of ours together. Many of our women are wives there, and Willow will have many friends." Father scowled. It was his way in matters concerning his firstborn. He mumbled, "We'll see about that." Mother moved closer to her husband and said in a low tone only he could hear, "Give this man many reasons to settle nearby. Give him a father who loves him." She had spent much time with the young man and had taught him as she once taught her children. He'd been obedient and respectful. "He is no fool," Mother concluded to her husband. "He is nothing like the stories we have heard." It was true Jean-Baptiste was neither fool nor child. He remembered the words Saint Erasmus spoke to him, and tried to tell Willow of the saint's wise counsel. He finally said, "The Spirit brought me to you." This she could understand. Before the winter snows came, he was as literate as the other men, as robust, and with surprising skills and techniques of warfare unfamiliar to them. He dressed as everyone else dressed, and in the gentle light of the fire, he looked like everyone else did too. Father observed to Uncle one day, "Snows were late this year." The younger men were playing at war, the old men taking bets on who should triumph. Uncle laughed. "I swear ice was forming, Chief, at the time," but Father interrupted. "At the time, you conspired with your sister, my wife, to take my daughter from me." Uncle smiled and said, "He is a good man. By now, even you must agree to that." Father remained stubborn. and unconvinced. By the time the snows came, it was as though Jean-Baptiste had always been a part of their community. When father laughed at one of his jokes, Jean knew his time had come. Willow let his name, Jean-Baptiste, tumble from her tongue. It was as music to his ears. She stood there with sudden shyness, her head bowed slightly to the side, neither submissive nor provocative. He spoke her name, and she raised her eyes to his. There is a moment in love when two people are complete and nothing exists but the world they are creating. This was such a moment.